Judge
Let me
kicks
be
a royal
perfectly
guard out of
clear.
court,
Any
then
further
learns he's facing a
outbursts from the
legal
gallery
expert
will
in
result in
uniform.
immediate removal and
Judge
contempt
Thompson,
charges.
a man in his late
You
50s with
show
sharp
contempt
eyes and
for
a
this
calm
court.
demeanor,
Answer
sat at
the
the bench,
question immediately,
reviewing the morning's
or you
case
will
files.
face the consequences.
It was a civil case, one that had already attracted
duty
attention
is
because it
clear.
involved a dispute
See
between
to it
two
that
well-known
order is
businesses.
maintained during these
The tension in the
proceedings.
air was palpable, and every person in the courtroom seemed aware that today's proceedings could have significant consequences. As the clock struck 10, the courtroom doors opened, and a figure entered. He moved with the precise posture and careful attention of someone trained for discipline and ceremony. The uniform he wore was immaculate, a dark blue coat with brass buttons gleaming under the sunlight, white gloves, and polished boots that clicked softly against the marble floor. A cap rested neatly on his head, and his demeanor was calm, almost regal. He didn't speak but simply walked toward the back of the courtroom, taking his assigned place among the observers. Judge Thompson glanced up from his papers and noticed the figure. A frown formed on his face. He had dealt with courtrooms full of various people, including lawyers, journalists, and curious spectators, but this was unusual. He didn't immediately recognize the uniform, and in his mind, it looked more ceremonial than professional. Perhaps it was a security officer, he thought, or someone trying to assert authority inappropriately. The judge had a reputation for maintaining strict order in his courtroom. Anything that seemed out of place was not tolerated lightly. "Excuse me," Judge Thompson called, his voice firm but not unkind. "Sir, you are not part of this court session. I must ask you to leave immediately." The figure paused. His posture did not change. He did not raise his voice, and he did not argue. Instead, he simply nodded slightly, a motion so subtle that most in the courtroom might have missed it. Then, with slow, measured steps, he turned and walked toward the door, his polished boots making a soft rhythm against the floor. The sound echoed in the quiet courtroom, drawing the eyes of everyone present. Whispers began to ripple through the audience. People leaned toward each other, murmuring in confusion and curiosity. "Who is that?" one spectator asked quietly. "Why is a uniformed guard in court?" another responded. The lawyers at their tables glanced up from their notes, raising eyebrows at the unexpected disruption. Even the clerks and bailiffs, usually unshakable in their routines, seemed momentarily unsettled. Judge Thompson, feeling the weight of the courtroom's attention, straightened his robe and cleared his throat. "Let us continue," he said, attempting to restore normalcy. He opened the next file and began reviewing the case again, trying to push aside the distraction. The legal assistants scribbled notes diligently, and the lawyers prepared their statements, but an air of unease lingered. The man in uniform had not protested or argued. His calm acceptance of the order to leave was disarming. There was something about the way he moved that suggested discipline, intelligence, and experience. Judge Thompson tried to focus on the case at hand, reminding himself that he had seen strange occurrences before in courtrooms. Still, a small part of him felt uneasy. He had acted swiftly, perhaps too swiftly, and the feeling of having made a mistake began to gnaw at him, though he did not yet know why. As the proceedings continued, Judge Thompson observed the reactions of those around him. The lawyers seemed slightly distracted, glancing toward the door through which the man had exited. The spectators, some leaning forward in curiosity, were murmuring quietly. Even a few of the bailiffs exchanged glances. Something about the figure had left a subtle impression on everyone. Despite this, Judge Thompson pressed on. He had a reputation for fairness and professionalism, and he was determined not to let a small disturbance derail the case. He addressed the first lawyer, listening carefully as arguments were presented. He asked questions, clarified points of law, and reminded everyone of the importance of staying on topic. His voice was steady and his demeanor calm, but internally he could not shake a sense of uncertainty. The courtroom was designed to command respect and attention. The high ceilings, the carved woodwork, the polished floors, and the long benches all contributed to a sense of formality and tradition. Judge Thompson, having spent decades in the legal system, understood the power of these surroundings. They demanded decorum, and any breach of protocol could feel magnified in such a space. The sudden appearance and removal of the uniformed figure seemed to amplify this sense of protocol being broken. As the case moved forward, Judge Thompson began to notice subtle details that he had not paid attention to before. The audience members, while mostly respectful, were still glancing toward the door and whispering. The lawyers, though professional, seemed slightly distracted in their presentations. Even the clerk, who had been typing notes diligently, paused occasionally, as if caught in a moment of curiosity. Judge Thompson realized that his quick decision had created a ripple effect. By acting without full understanding, he had unintentionally drawn attention to something mysterious and important. Outside the courtroom, the man in uniform walked calmly down the corridor. He moved with the same precision and discipline that had marked his entrance. While he appeared to be a simple guard to the untrained eye, there was more to him than met the eye. Years of training, experience, and specialized knowledge were embodied in his measured steps and composed demeanor. He understood the importance of the situation and had no intention of creating conflict, but he also knew that the courtroom's reaction would soon reveal the misunderstanding. Back inside, Judge Thompson continued to preside over the case, yet his mind wandered intermittently to the man he had asked to leave. Something about him seemed familiar, though he could not place it. He tried to refocus, reminding himself that his duty was to the law, not to appearances. Yet a nagging feeling persisted. He had dismissed someone who seemed important, but he could not yet understand why his instincts had told him to act so quickly. The lawyers on both sides presented their arguments with skill and patience. Witnesses were called, and evidence was examined. The judge asked questions, clarified points of fact, and ensured that each party had a fair opportunity to speak. The courtroom operated like a finely tuned machine, each part contributing to the larger goal of justice. Yet beneath this surface of order, the earlier incident lingered, subtle but undeniable. Minutes turned into hours. The audience remained attentive, some taking notes, others observing quietly. Every so often, a glance would be cast toward the door as if waiting for something or someone to return. Judge Thompson noticed these glances and felt a twinge of unease. He had acted decisively, but now he wondered whether his judgment had been too hasty. By the time the morning session was drawing to a close, Judge Thompson was acutely aware of the tension that had settled over the courtroom. It was not hostility or anger, but curiosity and anticipation. Everyone sensed that something unusual had occurred, even if they did not yet understand the full story. The removal of the uniformed man, brief as it had been, had created a moment that would not soon be forgotten. Judge Thompson leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples slightly. He reminded himself that the day's work was far from over, and that justice required focus and attention. Still, he could not entirely banish the image of the man in uniform, the disciplined posture, the calm demeanor, the quiet authority. It was clear that this person was more than a simple ceremonial figure. As the morning session ended, Judge Thompson called for a brief recess. The audience shuffled out, whispering among themselves. Lawyers discussed strategies quietly, while clerks gathered their notes and files. Judge Thompson remained seated for a moment longer, reflecting on the strange encounter. He felt a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, knowing that the day's events had set the stage for something unexpected. Little did he know that this brief incident, the quick decision to remove a uniformed figure from the courtroom, would soon reveal a surprising truth. The man he had dismissed was not just a guard, but a highly trained legal expert with a deep understanding of military and royal law. What had seemed like a simple breach of protocol was about to become a defining moment in the courtroom, testing Judge Thompson's assumptions, patience, and respect for authority in ways he could never have anticipated. And so, as the sunlight continued to pour through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor, the stage was set for a revelation that would challenge everyone in the room to reconsider appearances, assumptions, and the true nature of expertise. Judge Thompson, unaware of the full story, prepared to resume the case, unaware that the most unusual participant had not yet made his presence fully known. The courtroom had settled back into its routine, but the air still carried a subtle tension. Judge Thompson tried to focus entirely on the case before him, yet he could not stop thinking about the man in uniform he had ordered out. Something about the figure's posture, the calm precision with which he moved, and the aura of quiet authority lingered in his mind. The judge prided himself on his ability to read people, to judge character and intent quickly and accurately, and yet he had been uncertain in that moment. That uncertainty was uncomfortable, and it gnawed at him as he listened to the lawyers present their arguments. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, the man in uniform had paused in the hallway. His expression was calm, composed, and unreadable. He had not reacted with anger or frustration when he was asked to leave. That was simply not his way. Every step he took, every movement, was measured and deliberate. He understood that appearances often dictated how people perceived authority, and he also understood the importance of respect and patience. To react impulsively would have been improper, and he had long ago learned the value of restraint. But while he waited quietly, his mind was alert. He was no ordinary ceremonial guard, and today, in this courtroom, his expertise would soon become relevant. Years of experience had taught him to assess situations calmly and to wait for the right moment to act. Today was such a moment. He was part of the case not in the way most people would expect, but his presence mattered more than anyone in the room could imagine. Back inside, Judge Thompson called for the first witness of the day. A young clerk, nervous but prepared, stepped forward. As the witness spoke, presenting evidence and answering questions, Judge Thompson noticed something unusual. The courtroom had settled, but there were still subtle glances cast toward the door. The audience seemed almost unconsciously aware that something had been interrupted, that there was a figure who had momentarily broken the routine. Judge Thompson tried to ignore it, focusing on the facts of the case, yet he could feel the weight of expectation pressing down subtly from the observers. The lawyers, too, were keenly aware that the courtroom had been disrupted. They adjusted their notes, prepared their questions, and spoke with heightened care. In law, every detail mattered, and a momentary distraction could influence the course of proceedings. Yet beneath the surface of routine argument and presentation, the presence, or absence, of the uniformed man lingered. It was as though the room collectively held its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Judge Thompson, though usually calm and methodical, began to notice his own responses. He felt a flicker of uncertainty each time he thought of the man outside. He reminded himself sternly that he had acted according to protocol, that the rules of the courtroom were clear, and that no one should interfere with judicial authority. Yet his mind would not let go. Something was different about this situation. It was not simply a matter of discipline or decorum. It was a subtle, almost unspoken presence that demanded recognition, even in its absence. The session continued. Evidence was examined carefully. Lawyers presented documents, questioned witnesses, and made legal points with precision. Yet the rhythm of the courtroom felt slightly altered, as if the removal of the uniformed man had shifted the atmosphere in an invisible but tangible way. Every now and then, Judge Thompson would catch himself glancing toward the door, as if expecting to see someone return. Each time, he reminded himself that such thoughts were unnecessary, that the day's work required full attention. Outside, the man in uniform had returned to a small office just beyond the courtroom doors. He removed his cap briefly, running a hand over his hair, though his composure remained intact. He was accustomed to operating both in uniform and in professional roles that required intellectual rigor. Today, he was not a guard. He was a legal expert, trained in the specific nuances of military law, royal protocol, and civil procedures that often intersected in complex ways. His presence had been misunderstood, but the moment to clarify had not yet come. Patience was critical. He reviewed his notes quietly, checking documents, and preparing for the point in the trial when he would be able to participate directly. The case itself was routine in some ways, yet complicated by layers of contracts, agreements, and legal precedents. While many people in the courtroom thought of him only as a uniformed figure, he knew that his expertise could affect the proceedings in significant ways. He was ready to act, but he would do so with discretion and care, ensuring that the courtroom remained orderly while asserting his authority as a legal professional. Back inside, Judge Thompson called the next witness. This time, a senior manager from one of the companies involved in the dispute took the stand. The manager spoke confidently, presenting facts, documents, and clarifying events in the months leading up to the dispute. Judge Thompson listened carefully, asking questions to ensure clarity and accuracy. He was meticulous, as always, yet a small part of his mind wandered to the uniformed man he had dismissed. Who was he? Why had his presence seemed so commanding? And most importantly, had the judge's quick judgment been fair? The morning passed slowly. Witnesses came and went, evidence was examined, and arguments were made with careful attention. Yet beneath the surface of procedural rigor, an undercurrent of anticipation ran through the room. Those in the courtroom sensed that something unusual had occurred, though they could not articulate what. The absence of the uniformed figure was noticed more than his presence had been, a quiet reminder of authority and expertise that transcended simple appearance. By mid-morning, Judge Thompson had begun to feel the strain of maintaining full focus. His mind continually drifted to the incident with the guard. He prided himself on attention to detail, yet he realized he had been hasty. He had acted without fully understanding the situation, and now he wondered whether this decision might have consequences. He had not anticipated that the man in uniform was more than he appeared, a thought that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The courtroom itself seemed to echo the tension. The high ceilings and polished wooden surfaces, which usually exuded a sense of calm and tradition, now reflected the uncertainty in the room. Light from the tall windows created patterns across the floor, highlighting the contrast between order and the subtle disruption that had occurred. Every step, every whispered conversation, every glance toward the door reminded the judge and the observers that the day was far from ordinary. Then, unexpectedly, a clerk approached the bench quietly, holding a piece of paper with careful attention. "Your Honor," the clerk said softly, "there's someone here who wishes to clarify his role in the proceedings." Judge Thompson looked up, his curiosity piqued. He gestured for the clerk to continue. The clerk nodded and moved toward the door. Moments later, the uniformed man re-entered the courtroom, this time carrying documents and an air of quiet authority that was unmistakable. The audience turned their heads in surprise, whispering among themselves. Judge Thompson felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Relief because the man had returned calmly. Apprehension because he now realized that the uniformed figure was not merely a ceremonial presence, but someone with expertise that could influence the case. The man approached the bench, speaking in a clear, measured voice. "Your Honor," he said, "I apologize for the earlier confusion. I am here in my professional capacity as a legal expert specializing in military and royal law. I am prepared to provide clarification and support where needed." His words were calm, respectful, and precise, yet they carried the weight of authority. The courtroom reacted immediately. Whispers filled the room as the audience processed the revelation. Lawyers exchanged glances, some raising eyebrows in surprise. The judge himself felt a jolt of realization. The man he had dismissed was not simply a guard, but a highly trained legal professional whose presence was relevant and significant. For a brief moment, Judge Thompson felt a sense of humility, recognizing that his earlier judgment had been based on assumptions rather than understanding. The legal expert handed his documents to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. Judge Thompson took a moment to review them, noting the detailed analysis, citations, and legal reasoning contained within. It was clear that this man's role was far more than symbolic. He had knowledge, expertise, and authority that demanded respect. The judge nodded, silently acknowledging the lesson in humility and caution that the moment provided. As the trial resumed, the courtroom atmosphere shifted. The audience was still curious, but now there was a renewed sense of focus and attention. The lawyers treated the expert with respect, asking for clarification where appropriate and incorporating his insights into their arguments. Judge Thompson, too, adjusted his approach, balancing his authority with an acknowledgement of the man's expertise. The proceedings moved forward more smoothly, guided by a combination of professional respect and careful attention to detail. Throughout the morning, it became increasingly clear that appearances could be deceiving. The uniformed figure had initially seemed out of place, even intrusive, but in reality, he was an integral part of the legal process. His calm demeanor, precise movements, and thoughtful engagement demonstrated that authority and expertise could take many forms, not all of which were immediately recognizable. By the end of the morning session, Judge Thompson had learned a valuable lesson. He had acted swiftly, relying on his experience and intuition, but he had also been reminded that assumptions could lead to errors in judgment. The man in uniform had returned, not with confrontation, but with clarity, professionalism, and knowledge that enhanced the proceedings. The courtroom had witnessed a subtle but profound moment. A collision of appearances, expertise, and respect for procedure that would remain memorable to all who observed it. And so, as the participants prepared for the next part of the case, the courtroom carried with it a renewed sense of focus and awareness. Judge Thompson, in particular, remained thoughtful, reflecting on the earlier incident and the lesson it had imparted. He now understood that authority, expertise, and respect were not always obvious, and that sometimes the quietest presence could have the greatest impact. After the brief pause, the courtroom settled into an unusual stillness. The spectators, who had been quietly whispering among themselves, now turned their full attention toward the bench. The arrival of the uniformed legal expert had shifted the atmosphere completely. What had initially been a standard civil case was now infused with a sense of anticipation, as if the courtroom itself knew that an extraordinary moment was unfolding. Judge Thompson, though trying to maintain his usual composure, could not deny that the presence of this man had fundamentally changed the dynamic. The expert, standing calmly near the back of the courtroom, did not immediately speak again. Instead, he surveyed the room with a quiet, deliberate gaze. His uniform, crisp and precise, now seemed less like a distraction and more like a symbol of authority grounded in discipline and knowledge. Every movement he made was measured, yet natural, conveying confidence without arrogance. Those who watched him could sense that this was a person accustomed to responsibility and careful judgment, someone whose opinion mattered deeply, even in situations most would consider ordinary. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, regaining focus. "Please let us continue," he said, his voice steady but tinged with a newfound respect. He gestured toward the lawyers, signaling that the session could resume. The lawyers, adjusting their notes, acknowledged the expert's presence with polite nods. Each seemed aware that his role could provide valuable insights into points of law that were technical and nuanced, far beyond what they might have expected from a courtroom visitor. The first lawyer to speak after the interruption was Ms. Bennett, a senior attorney representing one of the companies involved. She approached the bench confidently, holding a folder of documents. "Your Honor," she began, "I would like to clarify a few points regarding the contracts in question, with the assistance of our legal advisor here, who has expertise in military and royal law that may be relevant to certain clauses." She gestured toward the uniformed expert, who acknowledged her politely with a small nod. Judge Thompson felt a flicker of humility. His initial judgment had been based solely on appearances. He had assumed that the man in uniform was a ceremonial figure with no direct role in the case, and his action had been hasty. Now the reality was clear. The uniformed man was a legal expert, and his contributions could be crucial. The judge silently reminded himself that justice required an open mind, patience, and the ability to recognize expertise wherever it appeared. The expert stepped forward slowly, carrying a calm, measured presence. He did not rush, speak loudly, or assert himself aggressively. Instead, he spoke with clarity, precision, and authority. "Your Honor," he said, "I have reviewed the contractual agreements in question. There are clauses that reference specific procedures and standards under military and royal law. While they may appear standard, their application in this context has specific implications that should be considered." His words were concise, but carried significant weight, as though each sentence had been carefully constructed for maximum clarity and accuracy. The courtroom listened in attentive silence. Witnesses and spectators alike leaned forward, sensing that the proceedings had shifted into a more serious and intricate phase. Even the lawyers paused briefly, allowing the expert to complete his explanation without interruption. Judge Thompson, who had seen countless legal arguments over his career, was struck by the precision and depth of the expert's knowledge. It was clear that the man was not merely familiar with legal concepts. He had mastered them in contexts few others had ever encountered. Ms. Bennett continued, asking the expert specific questions about the contracts and the implications of certain clauses. Each time, he answered patiently, providing detailed explanations without any hint of condescension. His ability to translate complex legal concepts into understandable language impressed the judge. It became evident that the expert's presence was not only valuable, but perhaps essential to fully understanding the case. Judge Thompson watched closely, taking careful notes and asking questions of his own. He was mindful of the responsibility he carried as the presiding judge, ensuring that all parties were treated fairly while also recognizing the expertise now present in his courtroom. He realized that his earlier assumptions could have undermined the integrity of the proceedings if the expert had not returned. It was a humbling moment, and he made a silent promise to approach future cases with greater caution and respect for appearances. As the session continued, the expert began to highlight subtleties in the contracts that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. There were references to procedures, reporting structures, and compliance requirements that had roots in legal frameworks rarely encountered in standard civil litigation. His explanations were detailed, precise, and methodical, allowing both lawyers and the judge to see aspects of the case that were not immediately obvious. It became clear that the early dismissal of this individual would have been a significant mistake if the matter had proceeded without his input. The courtroom atmosphere gradually shifted from one of tension to one of focused engagement. Spectators who had been merely observing now seemed genuinely interested in the legal discussion taking place. Their attention was captured not only by the content of the case, but also by the extraordinary scenario unfolding. A uniformed man, initially mistaken for a ceremonial figure, had revealed himself to be a master of legal interpretation. His presence added a layer of depth and sophistication that few in the room had anticipated. At one point, a witness from the other company raised an objection. "Your Honor," he said nervously, "I am not sure these clauses are relevant to the case at hand." Judge Thompson nodded, allowing the objection to be addressed. The expert responded calmly without raising his voice or displaying irritation. "While the clauses may appear minor," he explained, "their interpretation under military and royal law directly impacts the validity of certain contractual obligations. Ignoring them could lead to an incomplete or inaccurate assessment of responsibility." Judge Thompson felt a sense of relief. The expert's explanations were clear, precise, and compelling. He realized that the courtroom had been transformed by the man's presence. What had initially seemed like a simple civil case was now enriched with knowledge and perspective that could only be provided by someone with specialized expertise. The judge silently admired the expert's patience, professionalism, and ability to command attention without demanding it. The lawyers, too, adjusted their strategies. They incorporated the expert's insights into their arguments, asking more targeted questions and refining their presentation of evidence. Ms. Bennett, who had introduced the expert, appeared confident and composed, allowing him to clarify points whenever necessary. The opposing counsel, Mr. Douglas, initially skeptical, began to recognize the value of having such expertise in the courtroom. He approached the expert with cautious respect, asking questions that demonstrated his desire to fully understand the nuances of the case. As the day progressed, Judge Thompson noticed subtle changes in the courtroom's energy. Where there had been whispers and distractions earlier, there was now a collective focus on the proceedings. Witnesses were more careful in their answers, lawyers more precise in their questioning, and spectators more attentive to the unfolding legal discussion. The presence of the uniformed expert had elevated the entire courtroom, transforming it from a standard civil session into a demonstration of knowledge, authority, and procedural integrity. During a brief recess, Judge Thompson reflected on the lessons of the morning. His initial action, asking the uniformed man to leave, had been a mistake, though an understandable one given the unusual circumstances. He realized that assumptions based on appearances could lead to errors, and that respect for expertise and authority was essential, even when it was not immediately recognized. The incident would stay with him, a reminder of the importance of humility, patience, and careful observation in the practice of law. After the recess, the expert returned to the bench, ready to continue his analysis. He had prepared additional notes and had reviewed relevant legal precedents that could influence the outcome of the case. His approach remained calm and methodical, demonstrating both professionalism and a deep understanding of the law. Judge Thompson observed with renewed respect, recognizing that the courtroom's previous tension had been replaced by clarity, focus, and an appreciation for specialized knowledge. The remainder of the morning session was marked by careful examination of evidence and detailed discussion of legal principles. The expert guided the proceedings with precision, ensuring that all relevant information was considered and that the arguments presented were fully informed by the applicable legal framework. Judge Thompson found himself learning from the expert, gaining insights into areas of law that he had rarely encountered firsthand. It was an unusual but enlightening experience, one that would shape his approach to similar cases in the future. By midday, it was clear to everyone present that the courtroom had undergone a transformation. What had begun as a simple civil case, disrupted by the unexpected appearance of a uniformed figure, had evolved into a demonstration of expertise, patience, and the proper application of legal knowledge. Judge Thompson, the lawyers, the witnesses, and even the spectators had been drawn into a scenario that highlighted the importance of respect, careful observation, and openness to new perspectives. As the session concluded for lunch, Judge Thompson felt a sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn of events. The uniformed expert had not only clarified critical aspects of the case, but had also provided a lesson in humility, professionalism, and the value of expertise. The judge knew that this day would be remembered not only for the case itself, but for the extraordinary presence of a man who had initially seemed out of place, but had proven indispensable. And so, as the courtroom emptied for a brief break, the participants carried with them a deeper understanding of the complexities of law, the importance of careful judgment, and the unexpected ways in which expertise could reveal itself. Judge Thompson remained seated for a moment longer, reflecting on the remarkable events of the morning and preparing himself for the continuation of the case, fully aware that the presence of the uniformed legal expert had forever changed the way he would perceive appearances. Authority and knowledge. After the lunch recess, the courtroom returned to a calm but charged atmosphere. Judge Thompson had taken the time to reflect on the morning's events, and he was more aware than ever of the importance of humility, patience, and careful observation. The unusual circumstances had left a lasting impression. What had begun as a seemingly ordinary civil case had turned into a profound lesson on the dangers of assumptions and the unexpected value of expertise. The uniformed legal expert had returned from his brief absence, walking with his usual composed and measured steps. The courtroom, once bustling with whispers and curiosity, now watched him with respect and anticipation. Even the spectators, who were largely unfamiliar with the intricacies of legal procedures, sensed that his presence carried significance. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that this man had knowledge that could illuminate aspects of the case that might otherwise remain unclear. Judge Thompson called the session to order. His voice, calm and steady, carried the authority of the bench, but there was a subtle difference. It was tempered by awareness and a newfound respect. "We will now proceed," he announced. "All parties are expected to maintain focus and professionalism." His eyes briefly met the legal experts, silently acknowledging the critical role he would play in guiding the proceedings. The expert, standing near the center of the room, began methodically reviewing the remaining evidence. He pointed out nuances in contracts, procedural discrepancies, and obligations that had initially been overlooked. Each explanation was precise, clear, and presented in a way that both the lawyers and the judge could understand. He did not speak in jargon or unnecessarily complicated language, recognizing the importance of making legal reasoning accessible. As the discussion continued, Judge Thompson noticed a remarkable transformation in the courtroom. The lawyers were more focused, witnesses were calmer, and the spectators were quietly attentive. The earlier tension caused by the unexpected appearance of the uniformed figure had given way to engagement and respect. It was as if the expert's calm authority had created a ripple effect, elevating the professionalism and attentiveness of everyone present. Ms. Bennett, who had first introduced the expert, worked closely with him. She asked questions about specific clauses, ensuring that their application was fully understood. The expert responded with patience and clarity, offering guidance that helped refine legal arguments. Judge Thompson listened carefully, occasionally interjecting to ask questions of his own. It was clear that the courtroom had become a space of learning and collaboration, rather than mere contention. Even the opposing counsel, Mr. Douglas, adapted to the situation. Initially skeptical, he had begun to recognize the value of the expert's input. He posed questions thoughtfully, seeking clarification on points that could affect his case strategy. The expert answered each query calmly, never dismissing any concern, but always grounding his responses in precise legal reasoning. The dynamic in the courtroom had shifted. What had started as a clash of appearances was now a demonstration of cooperation, respect, and shared understanding. Throughout the afternoon, the expert highlighted additional elements that could impact the outcome. Certain procedural requirements, often overlooked in standard civil litigation, had significant implications due to their connection with military and royal law. The judge was impressed by the depth and relevance of these insights. He had presided over countless cases in his career, yet few had provided such a clear demonstration of how specialized knowledge could shape the interpretation of legal obligations. Judge Thompson found himself reflecting on the events more deeply. He recalled the moment he had ordered the uniformed man to leave, feeling a mix of embarrassment and realization. His initial action had been hasty, based on assumptions rather than understanding. Yet the man had returned, not with confrontation or resentment, but with professionalism, knowledge, and an unwavering calm. This contrast was striking. The judge realized that authority was not merely about position or title. It was also about the ability to act with integrity, patience, and insight. The courtroom, meanwhile, was fully engaged. Witnesses gave testimony with renewed clarity, guided by the questions posed with the expert's input. Lawyers adjusted their arguments to reflect the deeper understanding now available. Spectators, many of whom had arrived with only a passing interest in the case, became attentive, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. It was a rare example of how knowledge and professionalism could transform even a routine legal proceeding into a compelling demonstration of skill, patience, and ethical conduct. As the afternoon wore on, Judge Thompson saw an opportunity to acknowledge the lessons learned openly. He paused, looking across the courtroom. "I wish to address an earlier incident," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Earlier this morning, I mistakenly asked a member of the audience to leave, assuming he was not part of these proceedings. I have since learned that he is a highly trained legal expert whose insights are both relevant and valuable. I apologize for the oversight and thank him for his professionalism and contributions." The courtroom responded with a quiet but palpable acknowledgement of the judge's statement. The legal expert nodded politely, accepting the apology with the same calm dignity that had marked his behavior throughout the day. There was no need for further words. The simple acknowledgement and professional composure conveyed respect, understanding, and mutual recognition. Following this moment, the proceedings moved with renewed focus and efficiency. The expert guided the court through remaining evidence and points of law, ensuring that all aspects of the case were considered thoroughly. Lawyers engaged with each other, and with the judge more thoughtfully, incorporating the expert's guidance into their arguments. The witnesses responded with clarity, aided by careful questioning and structured guidance. The courtroom operated with a sense of purpose and mutual respect, a stark contrast to the tension and uncertainty that had marked the morning. Judge Thompson felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The day had started with confusion and misjudgment, but it had evolved into a demonstration of how professionalism, expertise, and patience could transform a challenging situation. He recognized that the uniformed expert had not only provided essential legal guidance, but had also taught a subtle yet powerful lesson about humility, observation, and respect for authority in its many forms. By late afternoon, the case was nearing its conclusion. The remaining arguments were presented, and the legal expert offered final clarifications on technical points. Judge Thompson reviewed the evidence carefully, taking into account the insights provided. It was clear that the input had been invaluable, shaping a more complete and accurate understanding of the situation. The courtroom atmosphere remained respectful and attentive, with everyone engaged in the final stages of deliberation. When the final statements were made, Judge Thompson addressed the courtroom. "This case has reminded us all of the importance of careful judgment, professional respect, and the value of expertise," he said. "We must always remain open to learning, even when we think we understand the situation fully. Today, we have witnessed a remarkable example of how patience, knowledge, and integrity can guide us toward clarity and fairness." The legal expert, standing quietly, acknowledged the words with a nod. There was no need for further explanation. His calm presence had spoken volumes throughout the day. Spectators, lawyers, and witnesses alike left the courtroom with a sense of having witnessed something extraordinary, an event that transcended the details of a single case and offered a broader lesson about professionalism, respect, and the quiet power of expertise. Judge Thompson lingered for a moment after the courtroom emptied. He reflected on the day's events with a mixture of humility and gratitude. He recognized that he had learned an important lesson. Authority and judgment were not merely about rules or appearances, but about understanding, patience, and willingness to learn from others. He resolved to carry this insight forward into every case he would preside over in the future. The uniformed legal expert quietly left the courtroom afterward. He returned to his duties, carrying himself with the same composure, discipline, and quiet authority that had defined his presence throughout the day. To the casual observer, he might have seemed simply a man in uniform, but to those who had witnessed the events, he was a symbol of professionalism, integrity, and the profound impact of expertise. In the days that followed, the story of the morning's events spread among legal circles and beyond. It became a lesson not only in law but in human behavior, respect, and the importance of careful observation. Judge Thompson, in particular, reflected on it often, sharing the experience with colleagues as an example of how humility, openness, and recognition of others' expertise could elevate both legal practice and personal understanding. The case itself reached a fair and balanced resolution, guided in part by the insights of the expert. Yet the lasting impression went beyond the legal outcome. Everyone involved remembered the day as one in which appearances were misleading, assumptions were challenged, and a quiet, disciplined presence revealed the power of knowledge, patience, and integrity. Judge Thompson, sitting at his desk after the proceedings, wrote notes to himself about the lessons learned. He emphasized the importance of avoiding snap judgments, respecting expertise, and approaching every situation with openness and curiosity. The uniformed expert had not only contributed to a specific legal case, but had also provided a broader example of how professionalism and knowledge could transform understanding and behavior. The courtroom itself seemed to retain a subtle echo of the day's events. Its high ceilings, polished floors, and carved woodwork had witnessed a remarkable demonstration of respect, knowledge, and collaboration. Every participant, judge, lawyer, witness, or spectator, had been reminded that appearances could be deceiving and that true authority often revealed itself through calm, thoughtful, and informed action. As the day came to a close, Judge Thompson stood and looked toward the doors. He knew that the courtroom, and indeed the practice of law itself, would continue as usual, but he also understood that nothing about the morning and afternoon would be forgotten. The lessons of patience, humility, and recognition of expertise were indelibly etched into his experience, shaping how he would approach the future, both as a judge and as a person navigating the complexities of human behavior. And so the day ended, not just with the conclusion of a legal case, but with the quiet affirmation of a profound truth, that knowledge, discipline, and calm authority could transform misunderstanding into clarity, tension into cooperation, and ordinary proceedings into unforgettable lessons in professionalism and respect.